First of all, thank you all for being here on this wonderful October evening. We are once again coming together to raise awareness in our community about the issue of domestic violence. The purpose of this panel is very simple. We want to give you each the facts and give you tools to address this issue wherever you might encounter it, whether it's in your life or a coworker's life, a family member, or perhaps even a neighbor. The facts about domestic violence are stark and very painful to read or hear. Homicide, for example, is the leading cause of pregnant and postpartum women, leading cause of death, accounting for nearly 1/3 of maternal injury deaths. In our city, which is comprised of a high percentage of immigrant women from around the globe, we know that we face additional challenges that are provided to us by the immigration status of the victims. One study in New York found that over half of the women killed as a result of intimate partner violence were foreign-born, and only 45% of those women were born in the United States. Violence is not restricted to only physical violence. It is often accompanied by psychological abuse, and in many cases, up to 50% of women who are battered physically also experience some form of sexual abuse. We are tonight very pleased and honored to have this impressive panel of experts who each specialize in one aspect of this pervasive and devastating epidemic in our communities. Starting with Ms. Alice Slaughter. Ms. Slaughter is a 27-year police veteran. She is the president of the Covina Women's Club and the co-founder of DVAC, and she'll explain more about that in her talk. Next to Ms. Slaughter is Ms. Leslie Segala. Ms. Leslie works with the organization Peace Over Violence. Her job title is the Rape Prevention Education Coordinator, and she is here to talk to us about the role of prevention and also sex assault within domestic violence situations. Next we have Dr. Kathy Mathis, a very familiar face in our community, recipient of the Congressional Medal of Merit for her work in the field of domestic violence. She's the former director of our very own Glendale YWCA's Domestic Violence Project, and she is now the principal of her own consulting and training firm. Last but not least, we have Detective Andrew Jenks from our assaults unit in the Glendale Police Department. So just a couple of things. If you would please hold your questions until the end. We have a few minutes after the discussion for the audience to ask any questions that you might have or to comment. And we're going to go ahead and get started with the panel. So first and foremost, would each of you just say a few words in introduction to yourself, maybe a little bit beyond what I said?
My name is Alice Slaughter, and I am currently the president of the Covina Women's Club in Covina. And I would like to begin with telling you a story about Monica. Monica Thomas Harris is a mother of 2 children, and she was kidnapped by her estranged husband, and his name is Curtis Harris. After having several hours in his control where she was tied up with duct tape, threatened with a stun gun and a regular pistol, she was taken to a motel, she was raped, and then she was released. After she was released, she went to the West Covina Police Department and reported this incident to them, and they arrested Curtis. He was in jail for 30 days, and the DA's office held a pre-trial, a pre-trial, at which time they offered him a plea to plead to a lesser charge, and they allowed him to plead to false imprisonment and felon in possession of a gun. And then, to make matters even worse, they allowed the man to go free on a no bail and own recognizance parole for 30 days until they wanted him to come in and turn himself in and be in prison for 16 months. After he was released, about 2 weeks later, he again kidnapped Monica, and he held her captive for 2 days and 2 nights. And during this time, he tortured her again. He tied her up, he threatened her with a gun, and he ended up shooting her and killing himself as the coward that he was. The problem came about that the court had never issued a any restraining orders, which should have been done immediately. The first time he was in court, when he was arraigned, he should have had a restraining order issued. They didn't issue it then. When he was released in December, Monica said, I don't think he has a restraining order, so she went to the police department and checked, and sure enough, there was nothing on the computer. She went to the court, and she yelled and screamed, and they finally filled out the paperwork and said they would take it to a judge. The judge wouldn't file it at the time, so they held it. And this was on the 21st of December. The 22nd was a Saturday. The 23rd was a Sunday. The 24th was Christmas Eve, and they took it back to another judge, and that judge also said he wouldn't sign it unless all parties were in his courtroom. And I think it's because of the type of protection order that they were using. It wasn't an emergency. It wasn't a regular one that you can go to the court yourself and obtain through the court. And so that situation fell through the cracks. There was never any order issued. And during the time of this trial, this pre-trial, Monica was not notified that he was in court. She didn't have the right to even talk to any DA about the possibility of them giving him a lesser plea. Her rights were violated, and over 40 penal code sections and policies that are in effect at this time at the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office were violated. The judiciary also made many errors. They never looked at the probation report, for instance, which said he was not to be released. So after this occurred, my friend and I went to the court to find out what the heck had happened and why this came about this way. We were trying to help Monica get through this, and had given her advice, and we'd go to court with her. We would help her through it. Well, you can't go to court with someone if they don't know they have to be there. And so we decided to start a coalition to make changes and to raise a big ruckus so that the DA's office would know that they could not operate this way any longer. And the DA did do an investigation, and that is the Curtis Harris report, and it is on their website if you ever want to read it. It's about 65 pages or something. They did a good job with the investigation as far as tracing all the problems that occurred. And afterwards, about 6 months later, they put out a directive, which is about 4 pages long, to mandatory some things that they did wrong, and to try to correct the situation in-house. In the meantime, we had sent letters to the Attorney General's office asking them to investigate the DA's office. We sent 2 requests, and we did get a letter back. And their response was that the DA's office did not whitewash it. They did not cover it up. They faced the fact that they had made all these mistakes. They did their investigation, and they made changes to correct it. And so they didn't feel that they needed to do an investigation at this time. But our focus is, what's to stop them from doing it again? Nothing. Nobody has the right to go in there and monitor how they do their job or how things are handled. And so we're interested in trying to get some legislation together to try and change these laws so that this cannot happen to another person.
Thank you. My name is Leslie Segala. I'm with the agency called Peace Over Violence, formerly known as the Los Angeles Commission on Assault Against Women. Part of my role as the Rape Prevention Education Coordinator is going into the community, not only talking about what sexual assault is as well as domestic violence and the roles that they play, but most important, we talk about prevention. Part of my role is going out and speaking especially to teenagers and adults about what we can do to basically inform how not only can we provide services, but how to prevent violence, something that has been happening obviously for many, many years. and bringing that back into the community.
I'm Dr. Kathy Mathis, and as you were hearing, there's a lot of good agencies and good people doing a lot of work in domestic violence prevention and education. And one of the things that I'd like to bring up this evening is the fact that there are a lot of us who are organized doing this type of thing, but you also can do something. It doesn't take just those of us who are working with agencies to make a difference. You can as well. And I would like you all to know that the very fact that you may know somebody who's a victim of abuse and you listen to her, you're helping her. If you donate to an organization who's doing this work, you're helping them and you're helping the clients that they serve. Because it's not only women that are affected by domestic violence, it's the children as well. And there's lots of stories that we can tell on the subject about different women and different children. But I want you all to know that I want to leave with you tonight the charge that you take on personally something that will make a difference for somebody who's a victim of abuse.
Good evening. I'm Andrew Jenks. I'm a detective with the Glendale Police Department. I work in the Assaults Bureau. Myself, 8 other detectives, and a sergeant were charged with investigating crimes against all sorts of crimes against people, including but not limited to domestic violence, sexual assaults, child abuse, so basically all sorts of family-type crimes. And I want to thank the women that are here tonight because they make our job a lot easier when we have to go and investigate these cases. And we'll talk more about our role in investigating the crimes and prosecuting them, working with the district attorneys, and getting the strongest sentences possible.
Thank you for that. And while the mic is here, Detective Jenks, perhaps you could, if each one of you could actually point to maybe one major contributing factor to the continued violence against women from your own perspective. What would you say would be one major contributing factor?
If I could pinpoint it to one, I would know a lot. I would be able to answer a lot of questions. Violence against women, it's very complicated in many respects. There's many. It's often a crime that's very emotionally charged, and it's many times it's involving people who have a long history together, and it's very difficult to say one thing over the other. I think in our most severe cases, it's still often a crime of control, a crime of one person trying to control another person and have them do what they want them to do. On top of that, there's many other associated factors. Substance abuse continues to be a theme in many of our reports and many of our investigations. So I'm sure we'll hear some more.
Thank you for that. Dr. Mathis?
I think one of the biggest contributing factors are family systems. Domestic violence is a generational problem. It's a problem in our society because it's also taught in our family systems, where there's the thought process of entitlement, justification, blaming, and where there is power and control, as Detective Andrew said. And so when we can start making a difference at our family system level, we can start making a difference in society as a whole.
Like I said earlier, part of my job is actually to talk to teenagers and adults, and I know when I work with kids, one of the contributing things that I see is that a lot of them don't know that there's violence going on in their home. I think when you talk a lot to kids and explain to them what violence is, it's always amazing to see their expressions on their face to think, wait, my daddy hitting my mom, you mean that's not normal? And you see that increasingly, especially when I reach teenage girls. And for me, just this week alone, doing presentations specifically on teen dating violence, it was amazing to see how many girls would start tearing up, feeling overwhelmed, feeling, wait a minute, this is happening to me. This isn't an adult problem. This is a problem that's happening all over. From, we recently got the study report from the Liz Claiborne Foundation last year that said teen dating violence was starting as young as age 11. And one of the things that I find is when I do these presentations, many of these kids, we try to communicate to them about what, not make it a negative thing and saying domestic violence. We try to bring in what a healthy relationship is. And it's amazing how many of these kids don't understand what it means to be in a healthy relationship. So part of it is educating. I think that choosing to ignore the violence that's in the world is a huge contributing factor to why many children, many girls will grow up thinking this is normal. And obviously we know that it's not.
Being the last one, I agree with everybody on this panel. And also, the one thing that I think really contributes a lot is the modeling of behavior by children who are living in a home where what is going on seems okay to them because they don't know, just like Leslie said. And the modeling of the behavior of the fathers and the mothers, whoever is doing the violence.
Thank you for that. Since we're running a little bit behind on time because we started late, we've got some questions and we'll try to keep the answers maybe as concise as possible. Dr. Mathis, if I could have you please just provide a sort of nutshell definition, an explanation of the cycle of domestic violence for those who might be unfamiliar with it.
The cycle of violence is a cycle because it's repeated over and over, and every victim that encounters abuse in her family system or in her relationship goes through the cycle. The first stage is called the walking on eggshell stage, where she knows that something's going to happen. She just doesn't know when. She doesn't know what kind of event is going to happen coming her way, because he may have a plethora of tools and abuse techniques that he might use against her. So that's level one. Level two is when the event actually happens. That's when he, like a pressure cooker, has released his anger and his frustration on her, and the event has happened. And then he goes after that into level three feeling very, very good, because now he doesn't have any more stress and anger. And she goes into a position of, oh my word, what just happened? I need to decompress. I need to be stress-free. And then they go into the last honeymoon phase, or stage three, which is called the honeymoon stage, because that is when he knows that he must do something special to keep her. And so that is the phase where he will promise her things, take her on trips, use whatever technique that he knows will work to keep her in the relationship. And it's absolutely the most lethal phase, because that's when he truly, truly is not being honest with her, because he's lying and doing every trick under the sun to keep her in the relationship. That's the cycle of abuse.
Thank you so much. Ms. Segala, since the numbers that we do have with regards to domestic violence tend to be very compromised, we know reporting rates are extremely low, and within that demographic, the reports are even lower with regards to the women who actually report sexual assault within their marriages. And we know that the state of California very recently changed the statutory punishment for marital rape to be equivalent to that of rape in any other circumstance. So what I would like for you to do is sort of briefly define what would constitute that within a relationship.
Well, rape is defined basically as non-consensual sex. And that could be anything from verbal to not verbal, which in the state of California it basically means under the influence, under the age of 18, or under coercion. And I think especially with women who it's in a relationship, there's this feeling of feeling like they're obligated and feeling like they have to, or not even asking them, just doing it to them. And many women feel like that's actually part of their role. I actually had a crisis call where I experienced talking to an 88-year-old woman who had heard the definitions and was pretty much calling because she now felt, after many years of being in a marriage of 40 years, she now realized that she had been being raped in her relationship. And it's very profound once you kind of realize what the state is actually telling you under the California law.
Ms. Slaughter, in your estimation, particularly with your experience throughout the Monica Curtis Harris case, what do you think would be the most important step that a woman who is trying to get out of a relationship take in order to ensure her own safety?
In Monica's case, she didn't tell anyone. She didn't tell people that she was being abused. She didn't tell people that her ex-husband was trying to control her every move. I believe that that if you are in that situation, the best thing that you can do is to tell everyone. Tell your parents, tell your sisters, they don't have to let the man know that you're telling them, but you need to have somebody to help you. And telling everyone what's going on in your home might save your life.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to open that up to the rest of the panel, actually. Is there something, other steps that women can take to help ensure their safety?
Well, I know for us at our agency, one of the things we encourage is to become familiar with your area. I know the other role that I play is actually as a self-defense instructor, and we talk a lot about awareness and assertiveness and even, if need be, physical techniques as part of our program, because part of what happens is for a lot of these women, they don't have any form of safety. Sometimes even telling everybody, I think that we all know that for a woman it could actually take 6 to 8 times before she'll leave her batterer. And in many cases, if they've done those many times, many of them may feel like their family or friends may not be there for them and may not support them. So there's other things that they might want to do for themselves. And sometimes even, taking these classes such as this may even help them get that awareness for themselves and assertiveness to actually leave. Because, like I said earlier, it's very painful to see when, I think all of us might have experienced this on the panel, helping a survivor of domestic violence, and the reality is that they may go back to their batterer for many reasons, from family, children, finances. There's so many reasons why. So I think it's important for her to get more educated and help on how to be able to leave her batterer.
I would just like to add to that having a safety plan is very, very important. Having your important documents kept somewhere where you can get to them in a hurry. Have copies of important paperwork, your children's paperwork, things like that. Also in your safety plan is to know that you have a place to go. Start planning ahead of time, that you know the hotline numbers, or of safety places, for instance the police department, a hospital, an agency, a domestic violence program, those types of things. Or if nothing else, go to the church that you go to, or the synagogue, or the temple, your place of worship, and ask them to help you. But definitely tell somebody and ask for help and have a plan in place.
Thank you. And a quick plug, if you visit the Commission's website at www.ci.glendale.ca.us/women, you'll find tips on making a personalized safety plan listed right on the front page of our website. And then our last, Detective Jenks.
Did everybody get that website?
I promise I'll include it in the video.
Of course, I agree with everything the panel had to say. And what's very frustrating for police officers many times is the patrol cop on the street will repeatedly go to houses and see the same cycle of violence that Dr. Mathis was talking about. And they see it firsthand because they have repeated calls for service, and they pull their hair out because the police want to help and they want to do something, and they may make an arrest, but 2 weeks, a day, a month, whatever, then the parties are back together. I would say for someone that's being abused, you really have to utilize the system and try to utilize some resources, because there are resources out there that are in place, whether it be shelters, churches, advocates, and when women have used those resources, it's really their best shot to break that cycle, because the cycle is not going to be broken inside that home. The woman needs to get out. She needs to get out and break out. So there's many ways to do it, but it starts with restraining orders. Police officers typically in an abuse situation will offer an emergency protective order. Oftentimes we see that while the victim may get an emergency protective order, they don't follow up on the steps, they don't go to the hearing, because, again, the cycle continues, and the next day, he's a nice guy again, and he's apologizing, and it's all, wine and roses, and it just starts all over again. So it comes to a point where it just has to stop, and it has to break. And it takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to do that.
Okay, I'd like to move next to Ms. Slaughter. And this question kind of cuts a little bit more to the meat of what you and I have talked about in our conversations. We've spoken extensively about the role of the media coverage, and particularly with the intersection with race in terms of Monica being a black woman in LA, and who gets covered in the media is often an issue. We have in our city a large immigrant population, and so what we want to do is, what I'm asking, I guess, is what would you suggest in terms of how we could approach our coverage of addressing the needs in underrepresented communities and still being culturally sensitive, but at the same time not demonizing any particular group, because it's not a problem that's specific to anybody. It's actually a result of those family systems that rely on sort of male-dominant roles in the household. So what would you say to kind of address that?
Well, the way we had gotten media coverage with Monica was we had personal knowledge of reporters on newspapers who've covered the crime scene. And if you go to your newspaper, you look in there and it'll have a byline, and usually they'll have their website or a place where you can send email to them. And if you can spark interest with them, something about the case catch their eye, and have them publish something, then it gets picked up by other services. Like, it took about 14 days for the AP to pick up on Monica's case. And we were sending information constantly to everybody we could think of. We were sending it to radio stations, we were sending it to the local TV stations, all of the networks, the local ones, and we were just bombarding everyone regarding this case. And it happened that my friend and I met a reporter at the courthouse when we were there that day, and he took this case on. He had read it on the line from the other newspaper and wanted to find out what was going on. He went there and saw us, and we gave him information to help him write some stories, and he did an excellent job. And I don't think with Monica's case, we didn't emphasize that this is a black woman that would not be, that somebody wouldn't be looking for her. She was a beautiful woman. It had nothing to do with her being a black woman. But you do see that people who are people of color do not get the coverage. If this was a beautiful young girl like this lady who is a newscaster, this blonde lady that got beat up in her house, if it had been somebody like that, the press would be all over it. But we just badgered them.
So
and that's what you have to do. You just have to have somebody be your advocate and go out there and push, push, push.
Okay. Detective Jenks, I'm going to come back to you here. And what I want to address is also sort of one of those, I think, misconceptions about the role of police. Police do have a very specific role in the resolution of domestic violence cases, often one that is viewed with some degree of suspicion amongst the activist or advocate community. Can you please speak to the role of the police in domestic violence cases and the work of evidence gathering and why that's so crucial to these cases?
Sure. Remember when the police go into the situation, go into, for example, an investigation, at the beginning stages of the investigation, the police officers are not advocates. They're not social workers. They're not therapists. They're really fact gatherers, and our job is to gather facts for that case, to gather evidence for that case. And unfortunately, in doing so, we can't always do the things to make all the parties happy. Our goal as investigators is is to collect evidence. If we determine that there's a crime, then we're going to want to do the best job that we can to prosecute that crime. In our agency, we're fortunate to work with some very talented district attorneys that work only with these types of crimes, with domestic violence crimes, sexual assaults, and these district attorneys are highly trained in this area. So for the police, we need to think from the beginning that this case is going to go in front of a jury, that we're going to have to convince 12 people beyond a reasonable doubt that this individual is guilty of this crime. And while we know that there's cycles of violence and we see a lot of repeated patterns, in a court of law, those things don't always matter. We need to show facts. We need to prove it, because everything that we present is going to be argued against. There's going to be an attorney defending the individual who's going to argue every point that we have. So our role is really to collect as much evidence that we can, collect it in the best possible way that we can. What I mean is have clear statements, have tape recorded statements, have videotaped statements, so that we can show that to a jury if we need to. Many cases never make it to trial, but we need to assume that every case that we have is going to go that far. So while we definitely have a lot of compassion for our victims, it's not always seen that way. So what we try to do to help that is point victims towards advocates, point victims towards resources in the community who can play that supportive role, and support us, because if we have victims of crimes that are supported either with their family or through advocates or therapists, counselors, clergy people, when they're supported, the case is going to be much better, and we're going to have a lot less likelihood of a case falling apart down the road, or have a victim who wants to recant her testimony or back out because she's not supported.
Thank you so much for that. At this time, we're going to be wrapping up on sort of a more hopeful note. The world of anti-violence work is actually shifting more toward a public health model that utilizes the notion of prevention. So what we want to do is stop the violence before it happens. We don't want there to be a need for self-defense. We don't want there to be a need for any of our agencies. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is ask both Ms. Segala and Dr. Mathis, with this sort of shift toward public health and prevention, can you tell us some of the components that you see as particularly relevant to domestic violence and how we can start incorporating them in our day-to-day life, kind of leaving people with some tools, Dr. Mathis, as you said earlier, so that they can help prevent what's going on in their neighbor's house or their family member's house?
Well, as stated already, one of the very, very important things is to have the modeling in our homes and to get informed and to get educated. I've always been a proponent of having a violence and abuse prevention program in our schools as well, so that the home is one place, but in school children also get more information and education as to what is normal and healthy and what are good relationships, because if you don't have it in your home, how are you to know what it is unless somebody is showing you and teaching you and you encounter it that way? So what I would like to say is everybody get informed on it. Everybody be an advocate and listen, and to pass along information to people that you know are in need of the information, who may not have been even introduced to what abuse is. I know that I get a lot of calls from ladies who go, I don't know whether I'm abused or not. He doesn't really hit me. Well, there's a lot of different types of abuse rather than physical abuse. And so to get the word out that that information is there and women and children need to have it so that they can protect themselves and change family systems. And I don't want to leave the abusers out, because they're not all bad. They have bad behaviors and bad attitudes. And so there needs to be a lot more available to them as well, so that they change those attitudes and behaviors to where they can be loving fathers and husbands and boyfriends and brothers and parents, fathers to their children. There is help for the whole family system, but we need to get the information to the family system.
when we part of, at least with our organization, we have a curriculum called In Touch with Teens that actually goes out and talks not only to teenagers, but starting in middle school. And a lot of the things that I know that was just stated right now about how important it is to talk about prevention. You know, it's interesting how when we go out to do presentations, many times there are high schools, junior highs, that they don't want to hear the word domestic violence, or when they hear the two words domestic violence, they actually think it's an adult problem. And for many, it's not. I think part of what would help in preventing it is actually going in and explaining what it is to be in a healthy relationship, what it means to be in a happy, healthy relationships. We know that talking to teenagers, part of abuse isn't just physical. We also have to remember there's verbal, there's mental, there's emotional. All of those key things are part of what happens in a domestic violent relationship, and many teenagers don't understand that. And they expect, or at least have this visual, that it's just going to be someone hitting you, and it's not that. And many people don't understand what it is. A lot of part of our job is to go in there and actually explain, this is the cycle of violence. This is what's happening in an abusive relationship. Do you find yourself in an abusive relationship? And actually, one of the key components is actually helping people understand and be supportive of somebody in an abusive relationship, because I think not only in the media, but even ourselves find ourselves making blaming statements, saying things like, well, what were you doing there? Well, why did you go out with him? What did I tell you? And statements like that, what ends up happening is it ends up not only blaming the victim, but encouraging more people to continue, well, you know, she was dressed like that, so she must have asked for it. Or we told her not to date him. You know, he beat her how many times? Well, she must want it. I mean, I don't know how many times I'll ask students, what do you think, is this a true statement or not? Did she ask for it? And a lot of the kids will answer, yeah, she must like it because she stayed in the relationship. Helping people understand why they can't leave a relationship, how hard it is, and what they can do to help someone actually is what might help someone be able to leave the abuse. I think every day I actually challenge people to actually ask themselves, how many times do you say blaming statements? What were you there? Why were you there? It happens every day, and many times we want to assume, well, you know, that's something that would never happen to me. I think one of the biggest statements I hear from girls is, oh, he only needs to hit me once and I'm gone. And usually when I hear that, I go, well, my job is that he never hits you at all. That you never get to that point, that you can see that this is an abusive relationship before it even happens. And I think those are important components that we need to look at in educating students and children and adults. Because it's amazing, even going to college presentations and seeing students not even know what a healthy relationship is. So those are the key components I think would be very helpful in educating everybody.
I think a round of applause for this fabulous panel. Are there any questions? We have time for a couple if there are any. Okay, seeing none. We're going to have a quick set change here. This would be the time for you to grab your candles and get ready for the Candlelight Vigil. They'll be lit after some of the speeches, so at this time I think the volunteers, the sweet volunteers from NCL will be handing those out. So thank you all for being here. It is actually very heartening to see so many people here tonight, all ages, all backgrounds, coming together to raise awareness about this devastating and fundamental issue that we face within our community. The facts about domestic violence are really, really painful, and for your willingness to step into this uncomfortable place, you are to be commended. However, it is really important to remember that as hard as it is for us to hear about it, it's harder still to live with it. Tonight's vigil is to honor all of those who have faced this issue in their lives, for those who made it out safely and for those who didn't. Most of all, however, This is about our continuing hope and our burning passion to create a world that is safe for women and children and men alike. Women still do constitute the vast majority of victims of violence, particularly intimate partner violence, somewhere in between 90 and 95%. However, this dynamic, sadly enough, is all too inclusive. It excludes no one. Amongst the multitude of the ranks of victims are people of every stripe, gender, race, class, orientation, and profession. Because this issue is such an important one, members of our own City Council took time to be here tonight. And at this time, I'd like to invite our Mayor, John Draymond, who just made a very timely entrance, to say a few words. Also, Mr. Quintero, if you could step to the podium.
Thank you, Lana, and thank you, Frank. When Lana mentioned this evening and this observance to me and asked me to come, I was anxious to do so. But I have to tell you how naive and uninformed I am and how much I needed to learn. So thank you, Lana, for the data you provided for me. Many of us think we know a certain amount about this. When you read about the prevalence, some of the statistics that Lana was just mentioning, when you read about the prevalence and the incidence of not only domestic violence, workplace violence, it is more than surprising, it's shocking. Shocking to know that based on the percentages, any of us that work in a workplace of any size at all, know people, know women who are being abused through the workplace. And not just the toll, the human toll in terms of that individual, but the toll to business in general and our pocketbooks as well is stunning. And the fact that that isn't more well known is also stunning. What you do and what you're doing here this evening is so important. It illuminates that data. It puts a human face on that data. It reminds us as elected officials of some of the work we need to do in this issue, on this issue. And I thank you very much for having me. I thank you very much for giving me this moment. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, former Mayor Frank Quintero.
Thank you. I'll be brief. We have to walk. Let me start by thanking the Commission on the Status of Women, the YWCA, all the volunteers, and all of you for being here tonight and making this statement. I spent 28 years in vocational counseling, helping people find jobs and sending them to schools and so forth. And literally from the very beginning, there were domestic violence issues with the women that came through my office. And it knew no economic class. They could be engineers, or they could be nurses, or they could be blue-collar workers. But it was something that pervaded my 28 years in the field. And let me also say that in addition to looking at this as an adult problem, I agreed with the panelists that kept emphasizing how important it is that we get youth, we get young kids. I would go even before junior high. I would start in elementary school to understand that it's not okay to be a bully, to push girls, to call girls names. That is not okay. And so I think the schools, and there's a number of people here that work in the schools, I think they have an important charge to make sure that from the earliest times, young kids right into the teenage years understand that it's not okay. At a bare minimum, it's not okay to verbally abuse young girls or young women. But I think with the kind of turnout we have here tonight, I'm sure that everyone in this audience is going to do everything to combat what essentially is almost a disease, is a good way to call it. So thank you once again for being here tonight. It's really an honor to be with you.
I'd like to thank all of you so much for coming tonight. It's wonderful to see how many community members think that this is important enough to come out on a Friday night. We all know that domestic violence is an epidemic, and it knows no limits. It doesn't matter how much money we have, it doesn't matter where we live, it doesn't matter what we do for a living, and it doesn't matter what our ethnic background is. Domestic violence should not happen to anyone, ever, period. There is no excuse for abuse. And yet, it still happens. Please say with me at this moment, no more. Can I hear you all say that? No more. Again, louder, one more time. No more. Great, thank you. Perhaps you have lived with abuse. Maybe you ignored it because it only happened once. Or maybe you work or live next to someone who is being abused right now. The reason we have all come together tonight is to say clearly and in one voice that we will not be silent about this anymore. For all the women who cannot say it for themselves, for all the children who live in fear, for all the broken families, the broken bones, and the broken promises, let us say, no more. Again, no more. There is no doubt that silence is deadly. Near the end of this evening, as you see, we're having this candlelight vigil, a moment of silence to remind us of the ultimate cost that is paid by so many women at the hands of their husbands, their boyfriends, their lovers, their cousins. There is help available, and that is so important for everyone to know. The Commission on the Status of Women commends our own Glendale YWCA for their leadership role in assisting and helping victims of domestic violence to heal and to become strong advocates for others. The Glendale YWCA for many years has been the primary and sometimes the only domestic violence service agency in this city. There are attendees among us who are here only because of the help of our YWCA. And for that, we say thank you. Every woman, every child, and every man has a right to a peaceful and safe home. Please, peace in our community. It begins at home. For taking a stand against domestic violence tonight, the Commission on the Status of Women thanks all of you.
I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. And I want to thank the Commission on Women for helping us obtain this terrific location. I also want to thank the National Charity League Glendale chapter, of which I'm also a part of, for working tonight and helping us, and they are the providers of your treats. I want to let you know about the various services that the YWCA. We have been in the business of doing domestic violence now for over 28 years. And we have an emergency shelter with a hotline as well as a women's service center. And over the last year, we have been able to help over 6,500 lives. The Women's Service Center is set up so that we can potentially help women while they're still at home, help to figure out their situation, maybe change their job situation, but to help try to keep the family intact if we can. We have additional services with English as a second language courses. We have a lot of expanded services. The other service, the emergency shelter, is very close to our heart, and we are so thankful that we can provide that. I hope all of you can help us as a service agency within Glendale to continue to provide these services. It's my job as board president to get the funds to help us continue with doing that. And I appreciate all of you for coming out tonight. Thank you so much.
We just want to take a few minutes to give some last thank yous out there to everybody who has helped us put this on tonight. I'd like to thank first and foremost the fabulous board and staff of the Glendale YWCA, with particular recognition given to Ms. Shake Gazarian for her absolutely tireless commitment to her work in this event. The wonderful volunteers of NCL who have prepared by their own hands tonight's refreshment. Glendale Arts for their co-sponsorship and continuous enthusiastic support of the CSW. In particular, Barry, Elisa Glickman is fantastic. You are so lucky to have her. The amazing staff of the Alex, also for their support and help. Karen, thank you very much. City Parks and Rec staff for all of their tireless work, and to each one of you. Now go forth and spread the good words. Thank you.